held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. President Lee Jae-myung and his Mongolian counterpart have pledged to usher in a new golden era in bilateral ties, adopting a joint declaration to deepen cooperation across a wide range of sectors during their summit in Mongolia. The global AI boom is giving Korea's economy a lift, with the IMF sharply raising its 2026 growth forecast, saying booming chip exports have outweighed the impact of Middle East turmoil, despite the country's heavy reliance on the region for energy. Heavy rain swept across Seoul and the surrounding metropolitan area, snarling traffic and disrupting the morning commute. More showers are expected later tonight before summer heat returns in the days ahead. We begin in Mongolia tonight, where President Lee Jae-myung just held talks with Mongolian President Hosel Hulesuk Uhuna. The summit resulted in a joint declaration outlining ways to deepen South Korea's strategic partnership with Mongolia. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin, who's traveling with the president, reports from Ulaanbaatar.
A ceremonial welcome at Ulaanbaatar's Sukhumvit Square marked the beginning of what South Korea and Mongolia are calling a new golden era in bilateral relations. President Lee Jae-myung and Mongolian President Hulesuk Uhuna's first summit on Thursday concluded with the adoption of a joint declaration.
이번 정상회담의 가장 큰 성과는 우리 양국 정상이 한몽 관계의 황금 시대를 함께 열어간다는 공동의 비전을 확인하고 한몽 관계 발전의 지향점을 담은 공동 선언을 채택하였다는 것입니다.
Korea and Mongolia aim to raise bilateral trade to $1 billion by 2030. Last year, the figure stood at just under $700 million. That goal will be supported by a Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, or CEPA, after the two sides reached an agreement in principle. The deal is expected to expand cooperation not only in trade, but also in areas such as healthcare.
We discussed my proposal to pursue the construction of a much-needed second national cancer center in Mongolia through South Korea's concessional loans. We also signed a memorandum of understanding on conducting a feasibility study and advancing the project.
The two leaders also agreed to strengthen people-to-people exchanges. To help achieve that, Seoul and Ulaanbaatar signed an agreement recognizing each other's driver's licenses, making travel and long-term stays more convenient. North Korea was on the agenda as well. Seoul views Mongolia, which was the second country after the former Soviet Union to establish diplomatic ties with Pyongyang, as a valuable partner in its efforts to resume dialogue with the regime.
한반도 평화 정착을 위한 우리 정부의 노력을 언제나 지지할 것이라는 뜻을 밝혀주신 대통령께 다시 한번 감사의 말씀을 드립니다.
Guided by its open, independent, and multi-pillar foreign policy, Mongolia remains committed to promoting international and regional peace and security and to resolving current challenges through dialogue.
A total of 21 documents were exchanged, setting the tone for cooperation across the economy, public health, technology, and culture.
President Lee's trip marks the first state visit to Mongolia by a South Korean president in 15 years. It also comes earlier in Lee's presidency than in any other administration, which the Blue House says reflects the two leaders' commitment to strengthen bilateral ties. 송미진, Arirang News, Ulaanbaatar.
South Korea's AI-fueled chip boom is proving resilient, with the IMF lifting its 2026 growth forecast as semiconductor exports more than offset the economic impact of Middle East tensions. Kim Do-yeon has the details.
The International Monetary Fund has sharply upgraded its 2026 economic growth forecast for Korea to 2.6%. This is a 0.7 percentage point increase from the April estimate. The adjustment closely tracks recent revisions by the Bank of Korea and the OECD, which both raised their growth forecast to 2.6%. According to the IMF's July World Economic Outlook update released on Wednesday, in Korea, growth is expected to rise to 2.6% in 2026 and 2.5% in 2027, buoyed by strong external demand for semiconductors, which dominates the negative impact of the war. With these revisions, Korea's growth trajectory stands as the highest among advanced economies for 2026 and 2027. The report highlighted a remarkable performance in the first quarter of the year. The IMF noted that Korea surprised with a 7.5% growth rate in the first quarter, more than 4 times the 1.8% projected in April, powered primarily by a semiconductor and AI hardware export boom. The agency categorized the country as one of the top 4 net exporters of artificial intelligence hardware globally. In contrast to Korea's upward momentum, the global economic outlook for 2026 was downgraded by 0.1 percentage points to 3.0%. The IMF observed that national growth paths are diverging sharply based on 2 conflicting forces: negative supply shocks from the Middle East war and positive technology shocks from the AI value chain. While the United States held steady at 2.3%, high energy costs dragged down forecasts for the Eurozone to 0.9% and Japan to 0.6%. China's forecast rose to 4.6% on high-tech manufacturing, while the Middle East and Central Asia saw a severe cut down to 0.7% due to energy export disruptions. The IMF also raised its global inflation forecast to 4.7%, urging central banks to prioritize price stability while warning of potential macro-financial instability from sudden shifts in AI market expectations. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Yi administration is pushing against a U.S. congressional report that claims South Korean discrimination against American online retail giant Coupang. Park Chae-ryung explains.
In a press briefing on Thursday, South Korean ambassador to the United States Kang addressed the controversy surrounding U.S.-listed e-commerce giant Coupang.
There has been a shared understanding between the two governments that Seoul and Washington should stably manage the current issue so that it won't burden South Korea-U.S. relations.
Kang's remarks came after U.S. officials accused the South Korean government of unfairly targeting Coupang. The House Judiciary Committee last week issued an interim staff report saying that Seoul has a long history of engaging in economic discrimination against foreign companies, and that Coupang has been a consistent target. A White House official also weighed in following the report, saying that Coupang is being singled out by Korean President Lee Jae-myung's administration. Seoul's foreign ministry said the White House's remarks came as a surprise and that the report was written in a one-sided way. It said that the congressional report only reflects Coupang's claims while leaving out factual information Seoul had provided to the committee. The ministry stressed that the Korean government is handling the Coupang controversy under domestic law and does not discriminate against companies based on nationality. The controversy began last November when a former Coupang employee accessed the personal data of more than 33 million customers. Seoul later imposed more than $400 million in fines on Coupang over poor data protection. This led to Washington accusing Seoul of discriminatory attacks on the American-owned company. Ambassador Kang's remarks appear to be aimed at preventing tensions from escalating. Kang said the embassy will keep working closely with Washington to reduce any possible negative impact on bilateral relations. She added that the embassy will consistently explain the Korean government's position through consultations with the U.S. side. Park Chae-ryung, Arirang News.
Semiconductor stocks have powered much of the recent market rally, both in Korea and overseas. Now they're driving the sell-off, raising the question of whether this is just a temporary correction or the start of a downturn in the chip cycle. For more, we turn to our Kim Junong in the studio. Welcome, Junong.
Great to be here, Dami.
So Junong, let's start with today's market. Today's trading really showed just how volatile the market has become, didn't it?
It was actually. The Kospi today closed up 0.6%. At around 7,200, but swung between gains and losses several times throughout the session. I asked an economist what drove today's moves, but he couldn't point to any single factor, which highlights just how uncertain the market is these days. After hitting a record close above the 9,100 mark, the Kospi has remained as highly volatile. Circuit breakers have already been triggered 6 times this year, with investor fear reaching its highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. Behind much of the turbulence are sharp swings in semiconductor shares, with Samsung Electronics and SK hynix accounting for more than half of the Kospi's market value. Movements in the sector can have an outsized impact on the broader market. Analysts also point to single stock leveraged ETFs as another factor, amplifying the volatility.
Since late May, single stock leveraged ETFs have helped fuel an overheated concentration in semiconductor stocks, not only in Korea, but across global markets.
You know, Junong, semiconductor stocks have been on a remarkable rally, I must say, but the question is, why the sudden reverse?
Well, that's actually what surprised many investors this week. So this week was expected to boost sentiment, with major chipmaker events scheduled throughout the week. But the market reacted very differently. Take Samsung Electronics, for example. The company on Tuesday reported a record quarterly operating profit of around $58 billion. Yet its shares still fell more than 6% that day. SK hynix has also come under heavy selling pressure this month. Analysts say the biggest trigger is uncertainty over the memory chip cycle. Until now, the sector's strong performance had been driven by expectations of continued AI infrastructure spending from global tech giants. But rising AI infrastructure costs are raising fears that spending could slow down. That has put pressure on related stocks.
U.S. cloud company Oracle recently warned in its annual report that power and cooling constraints could delay data center construction. Analysts say such delays could weaken semiconductor demand and add to market volatility.
Those concerns are having a bigger impact on Korea's stock market, where chip stocks make up a large share of total market value.
So what should investors keep an eye on from here? I mean, more importantly, how can we tell if this is just a temporary pullback or, like I said, the beginning of a, downturn in the entire chip cycle?
Well, it's still too early to tell. The answer is likely to come from a series of key AI and semiconductor-related events scheduled through the rest of this month. Here's what's coming up. Taiwan's chip giant TSMC is due to report earnings in mid-July. Later in the month, SK hynix and global AI giants including Google, Microsoft, and Meta will also release their results. But before that, American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, for SK hynix are set to begin trading on the Nasdaq on Friday. Bloomberg says the offering drew strong global demand, with orders for more than 7 times the number of shares available. SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won is also set to ring the opening bell at Nasdaq, where he is expected to highlight the company's AI chip strategy. The trading debut will give SK hynix access to a broader pool of U.S. investors and serve as an early barometer of sentiment toward Korea's chip sector.
The ADR listing is a positive step. It broadens access for global investors and could reduce foreign selling pressure in Korea, which will give SK hynix a better chance to trade closer to its fair value.
Investors will be watching not only the earnings themselves, but also the AI spending plans that big tech firms unveil alongside their results. Those plans could provide the clearest signal yet on whether the semiconductor boom still has room to run or is beginning to lose momentum.
If big tech signals that AI investment will continue through next year and beyond, semiconductor stocks could find stability again. But if they warn of delays or express skepticism about data center projects, the sector could come under deeper selling pressure.
More answers are expected by the end of the month, but until then, investors should brace for continued volatility.
Right, which is why we need to keep an eye on the upcoming market events. Junong, thanks for coming in tonight.
Thank you.
South Korea's rainy season has officially begun, bringing heavy downpours across much of the country and prompting evacuations nationwide. Our Jo Young-eun has more.
Rain clouds swept into the Seoul metropolitan area on Thursday, prompting the season's first heavy rain warning for the capital. Since Wednesday, accumulated rainfall has exceeded 200 millimeters in the parts of Chungcheongdo region, as southern parts of Gyeonggi-do province also received nearly 200 millimeters of rain. Heavy rain alerts were issued across the capital, prompting Seoul to close access to all 29 riverside streams, while operations at 5 of the 8 Hangang River bus docks were also suspended. According to the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters, a total of 215 cases of weather-related damage had been reported nationwide in the morning. In North Gyeongsangdo Province, a man in his 70s was swept away by a swollen stream overnight and remains missing, and search operations continue. The heavy rain has also forced evacuations, with 423 people evacuated, mainly in the Chungcheongdo provinces. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, although rainfall eased in parts of the capital during the day, rain is expected until the end of the week.
Later Thursday into early Friday morning, the North Pacific High is forecast to push farther north again, narrowing the rain band and strengthening it into an intense, linear band of heavy rain.
The Seoul metropolitan area and Gangwon-do province are expected to see another burst of heavy rain into Friday, with rainfall rates reaching around 30 millimeters per hour. Once the monsoon system moves away, forecasters say intense summer heat will quickly follow. The North Pacific High and the Tibetan High are expected to build over the Korean peninsula, pushing feels-like temperatures above 33 degrees Celsius and bringing hot summer conditions nationwide. Jo Young-eun, Arirang News.
And Korea is racing to stay ahead of increasingly unpredictable heavy rain. As torrential downpours trigger flooding and disrupt daily life, authorities are strengthening flood defenses to better prepare for extreme weather. Shin So-eun has more.
It hardly feels like the rainy season as people shield themselves from the blazing sun with parasols. But a few hours later, a sudden downpour sends commuters scrambling for cover. Instead of the familiar monsoon, which usually settles in for weeks, the weather currently swings back and forth several times a day. According to a weather expert, Korea's late monsoon and swings in weather behavior were caused by cool, dry air lingering over the peninsula, preventing the North Pacific High from pushing north and delaying the arrival of the seasonal rain front.
We're seeing more frequent high-intensity rainfall because there's simply more warm, moisture-laden air moving in from the south. Once it meets the cooler, drier air over Korea, rainfall can intensify very quickly within a short period of time.
I'm standing here on the Pampo Riverside Walkway, but during heavy rain, this area can be submerged within minutes. To prevent another disaster like Gangnam flooding, Seoul has been expanding its water drainage system.
Catch basins at Riverside Path are kept clean to ensure efficient drainage, and warning signs have been installed to restrict public access when rising water levels pose a flood risk. Seoul has also been expanding its underground stormwater tunnel network to store and divert massive volumes of rainwater, a vital flood control system that channels excess water away from urban areas. As rapidly changing weather catches many residents off guard, new services like the eco-friendly Webrella umbrella sharing system are emerging, offering reusable umbrellas that doubles as parasols and rain umbrellas.
It's unpredictable. I don't know when to pack an umbrella or not. So, but other than like the weather app on my phone, I don't know where else to look at. Yeah.
AI is also effectively used to deliver in-depth analysis and faster warning alerts.
Unlike conventional weather models, now Alpha uses AI to quickly predict where rain clouds will move in the coming hours, improving short-term rainfall forecasting.
Officials advise to stay alert, monitor emergency notifications, and being ready to use flood control measures such as water pumps and flood barriers when heavy rain strikes. 신소은, Arirang News.
Korea's Supreme Court on Thursday upheld the 7-year prison sentence against former President Yoon Suk-yeol over charges linked to obstructing attempts to arrest him following his short-lived martial law declaration in 2024. Justices dismissed appeals from both Yoon and the special counsel, rendering the sentence final. Now, in their ruling, the justices also upheld findings that Yoon distributed false information to foreign media and infringed on the deliberative rights of several cabinet members who were unable to attend the key meeting before the declaration. Yoon's legal team has said it will mount a separate constitutional challenge to the ruling, while he remains in custody facing several other pending trials, including a separate case on insurrection charges. Korean defense shipbuilding is making waves at RIMPAC 2026 as foreign warships built here in Korea showcase their capabilities. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
They may fly foreign flags, but they are made in Korea. At Rim of the Pacific 2026, what caught the Defense Press Corps' eyes were foreign warships built by South Korean shipyards. One of them was the HMNZS Aotearoa, the Royal New Zealand Navy's largest fleet replenishment vessel, which was built by HD Hyundai Heavy Industries and delivered to New Zealand in 2020. Another vessel attracting attention was the Philippine Navy's newest 3,200-ton frigate that looks so similar to the ROK Navy's 3,100-ton frigate Daejeon, also taking part in RIMPAC.
I'm on board one of the Philippines' newest frigates, BRP Miguel Marbar. Built by a South Korean shipyard, it serves as a frontline combat ship in the Philippine Navy.
Also built by HD Hyundai Heavy Industries, it entered service in May last year. The ship's commanding officer says he has witnessed her great capabilities.
So far, we have not encountered any problems about the ship. It has a very nice capability, very good seakeeping, and the seaworthiness and the design is so far so good. The Korean shipyard really have a good design for this frigate.
When asked about the reason behind choosing the South Korean shipyard, the commanding officer underlined its speediness and support.
So it was constructed fast, and then we were able to commission our ships on time. And then the Korean defense companies were really supportive for us when it comes to the sustainment and other related matters, training and everything.
Already operating around 10 Korean-built warships, the Philippines signed a deal last December for 2 additional frigates, again proving what made in Korea means. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Honolulu.
Seoul was under its first heavy rain advisory of the summer earlier today, but it has since been lifted. Rain will gradually wind down across the Chungcheongdo provinces and areas farther south tonight. But across Seoul and the northern regions, it'll keep coming through tomorrow morning. So tonight is when you really need to stay alert. Torrential downpours could develop very quickly in these areas. From here on out, the heaviest rain will target eastern Gangwon-do province, where some places could pick up more than 150 millimeters of rain, while the central central regions, including Seoul, could see more than 120 millimeters of rain. Meanwhile, heat advisories are in effect across much of the Gyeongsangdo provinces and Jeju Island. And warm overnight temperatures continue in parts of the Gyeongsangbuk-do province and Jeju Island as well. Another round of showers is on the way for the central regions tomorrow, so be sure to keep your umbrella close. Once this round of rain moves out, get ready for the heat to ramp up again. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
It may have been the tomb of a young prince. Kyeongchong Tomb, one of Shila's ancient burial mounds. The gold crown and belt discovered here were notably smaller than those found in other tombs. The Shila royal family is believed to have carefully prepared the tomb for a young life that ended too soon, placing a variety of grave goods within. Among the many artifacts, one pair of objects in particular draws the eye. Earthenware figures that seem as if they might gallop off at any moment. Look closely, and you'll notice the two figures are slightly different. Did you spot the difference? One exudes authority, wearing an ornate headdress and full armor. The horse, too, is richly adorned with elaborate harnesses. In contrast, the other figure appears plainly dressed, with hair tied in a top knot and a cloth wrapped around the head. Based on their attire and size, the more elaborate figure is presumed to be the tomb's occupant, while the simpler one appears to be a servant. So what exactly are these pottery figures which vividly reflect the everyday life of Shila people? They are, in fact, hollow vessels, pitchers. Water could be poured in through a funnel at the horse's rear and dispensed through a spout at its chest. Then why would the Shila people place such intricate vessels in a tomb of a young prince? Perhaps it was a heartfelt wish that the young prince, whose life was cut short, would never go thirsty on his long journey to the heavens.
When did it all begin? The beginning of joy embedded in daily life, where steps of learning meet a bigger world. And history coexists. The legend continues. Innovative technologies come together to unfold a new future. Building a better tomorrow. A joy accessible to all. Always present in your daily life. JDC.
Knock knock. The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Poli Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. South Korea and Mongolia are looking to take their relationship to the next level. During the first state visit by a South Korean president to Mongolia in 15 years, President Lee Jae-myung and President Ugna-Hurelhu pledged to usher in what they called a new golden era in bilateral ties. The two leaders agreed to expand cooperation on critical minerals, resilient supply chains, and trade, while also reaffirming their commitment to peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and the northern East Asia. So to discuss what today's outcomes mean for Korea's diplomacy and economic strategy, we connect with Kim Yong-jin, professor at Seogang Business School. Welcome to the program.
Good evening. Pleasure to be here.
And also joining us is Mason Rishi, professor of international politics at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start a discussion first with Professor Rishi. President Lee's state visit to Mongolia, like I've said, it's the first by a Korean president in 15 years. So if you look at today's summit, what stood out to you the most?
I think there are really two things that stood out to me. The first is how similar the rhetoric is on this summit to other summits that Lee has had, especially over the last 6 months to a year. I'm thinking about with Brazil, with Vietnam, with Singapore. A lot of the same issues end up on the agenda. Critical minerals, partnership upgrades, supply chain cooperation, AI somehow always makes it in there. Energy security, digital cooperation, digital partnership, people-to-people exchanges, scientific exchanges, and that sort of thing. That was a lot of what was on the list here too as well. Obviously, North Korea and Korean Peninsula stability issues make it on to the agenda every time a Korean president has a summit. President Lee is either consistent or perhaps uncreative, depending on how you want to look at it. And then, we had the flourish this time of the golden age of South Korea-Mongolia relations being kicked off, which I think is kind of interesting. And the Mongolians may not look at it that way. If you look back at history, what they might consider to be the golden age is a bit different. The second thing that stood out to me was I didn't realize that the Mongolia-South Korea trade relationship was less than $1 billion in trade value. I actually thought it might be more than that, given the complementarity of their economies. It's really only about $700 million. And South Korea is only, I think, the number 5 or 6 trade value partner for Mongolia. I was a bit surprised by that. So I think given that there is actually quite a bit of significant room for growth in that important dimension of their relationship. So I guess my main takeaway is that, there really is a lot of things that they can do economically that would benefit each other.
Right, so we're going to expect to take a leap forward in bilateral ties in various aspects. And one of the biggest outcomes of today's summit was stronger economic cooperation, including the Korea-Mongolia SEPA. Professor Kim, how meaningful are today's achievements in expanding economic relations between the two?
Well, I believe that the conclusion and principle of the SEPA represent a highly meaningful breakthrough that fundamentally upgrade economic ties by securing critical supply chains and cutting, trade barriers and diversifying economic partnership, as we mentioned. And Mongolia holds 16% of global rare earth mineral deposit, and ranking 7th in copper reserves and 9th in molybdenum production. The deal directly counteracts tighter export controls from China by establishing a direct pipeline for critical element used in South Korea's high-tech manufacturing, semiconductor, and electric vehicle battery industries. In addition, eliminating tariff under the SEPA framework create structured settlement guidelines for goods and rules of origin sectors. It will foster a predictable business environment for Korean companies to safely expand and invest in Mongolia's rapidly modernizing retail, distribution, and infrastructure markets. This outcome serves as a core milestone in Korea's strategy to diversify its economic partners and build the resilience, network across Central and Northeast Asia. Even though, Professor Rishi might say he might not be, less creative, but I think that's very, very important issues for Korean president. So elevating bilateral relations beyond, casual trade into a formalized legal framework ensures institutional continuity. That's a very important part. Previously, Mongolia has, closer relationship with North Korea, and now we, get in there and accelerate joint economic and industrial and climate-focused initiatives.
So it will definitely create momentum for more cooperation.
Right. Right.
Now, if we stay with the economic aspect, critical minerals and supply chain cooperation have also become a major focus for both countries. So from an economic perspective, Professor, how significant is the progress made in this area during the visit?
Well, from an economic perspective, the progress made during this, state visit is a monumental breakthrough, I believe. That shift to South Korea from a passive buyer to an active, structural partner in Mongolia's mineral wealth. Amid tightening Chinese export controls on rare earth element, this visit directly serves South Korea's existential need to diversify its, advanced manufacturing inputs. South Korea currently relies heavily on China for critical minerals, securing Mongolia's massive deposit of copper, lithium, molybdenum, and rare earth elements provide a crucial buffer against the unilateral export bans. In addition, the timing aligns perfectly with the U.S.-led tax silica initiatives. The economic progress established a non-red supply chain, making South Korean high-tech export more compliant with Western regulatory framework. The visit injected critical political momentum into the stalled SEPA, you and I mentioned earlier. I believe that one big advantage of this visit will be a position change of Korea in the supply chain. Instead of just buying raw materials, South Korea is introducing its advanced engineering to build the processing plant and refineries within Mongolia. This drastically reduces transportation cost and ensure highly purity input for Korean tech firms.
So all in all, about the results of the latest agreements, we've seen more than dozens of MOUs. Professor Kim, which do you believe could have the greatest long-term impact for businesses in both countries?
Yeah, I just mentioned, I believe that the critical mineral supply chain and energy transition MOU signed, during the summit will have the greatest, long-term impact on businesses in both countries. This sector yield immediate and tangible synergy by, matching South Korean advanced technology with Mongolia's vast unexploited natural wealth. Korean tech giant in semiconductor, automotive, and electric vehicle battery sectors gain an irreplaceable raw material hedge. In other words, direct access to raw lithium, rare earth, copper, and molybdenum lowers, dependence on highly volatile singular export nations. Green technology firms, gain massive opportunities to export infrastructure, energy storage systems, and eco-friendly, district heating systems. Mongolian businesses will be also benefited. Mongolian enterprises can shift away from simple raw extraction toward high-value, tech-driven refining, processes. And massive Korean investment will directly upgrade domestic logistics, the regional electrical grid, and industrial transport pipelines. And most importantly, I think, the manpower is the most important part, right? Joint educational and industrial training roadmaps will build a highly skilled local tech and engineering workforce for future growth for both countries.
Right. Let's hope these agreements would be able to bring forth and thrive over the years to come. Now, beyond these economic outcomes, Professor Rishi, today's summit also marked the launch of what both leaders called a golden era in bilateral relations, as you've touched upon a while ago. What does that tell us about the broader diplomatic strategy of President Lee?
I think two things. The first is that President Lee's diplomatic strategy produces rhetoric that needs to be matched by execution after the glamour of the summits. So many summits these days, not just Lee, to be fair, this is all over the world. We're seeing a sort of inflation of partnerships where partnerships are upgraded to strategic partnerships are upgraded to comprehensive strategic partnerships are upgraded to global comprehensive strategic partnerships, and so on and so forth. And now we have the golden age of Korea-Mongolia relations, and that's fine. But what really matters is delivery afterwards. And this is, the same with Lee's meetings with the leaders of Singapore and Brazil and Vietnam and other countries. What matters now is getting the administrative apparatus in Korea and in Mongolia to get the digital cooperation mechanism up and functioning. Actually create the synergies on supply chains that Professor Kim was just talking about. Actively make sure from a government and a business side, on both sides of the equation, that the investment flows that are going into Mongolia to help support the critical mineral refineries and extraction process and processing, that actually is streamlined so that it can take place in a timely fashion. Really make the bureaucracy for student and scientific exchange easier so that these things can actually take place in a smoother fashion. And so the delivery afterwards, I think, is really one of the most important parts of this. The second thing is that we see Lee continuing with his middle and small power diplomacy to reduce the risks from great power competition. Again, that's sort of connected with what Professor Kim just said, regarding the risks that South Korea faces on critical minerals and resources, where you have China obviously as a problematic supplier, plus you have the U.S. Putting its pressure economically on South Korea as well. And it's notably the case that Lee has, I think, done an admirable job of reaching out to states that are middle powers and small powers, especially those that can meet specific types of needs on critical resources, AI development, energy security, and some of the other areas that Professor Kim just mentioned.
Right, a very important point that you've made. We've seen Professor Kim also nod enthusiastically about about the point that those agreements, it should be executed and put into action, and we're going to hope for that. But if we touch upon the diplomatic dimension continuously, Mongolia, it has long maintained ties with both North Korea and South Korea while pursuing its third neighbor policy. How does that make Mongolia an important diplomatic partner for Seoul?
Yeah, so Mongolia is a potentially important and useful diplomatic partner for South Korea, especially in a South Korea North Korea context. I was weirdly enough talking with my mother-in-law recently about Mongolia, and she said that she had a friend who worked there in the 1970s in Ulaanbaatar, and it sort of made me go back and think a little bit about some of the changes that we've seen in Mongolia. How it went from being quite underdeveloped and economically in some sense forgotten, and also how it was stuck in between the Soviet Union and China, but obviously more aligned to the Soviet Union. And so didn't have relations with South Korea until 1990. And now, of course, it's becoming more developed. And its role between China and Russia means that it's really learned to navigate great power competition. So in some sense, is a sort of useful model for other countries. And of course, its diplomatic relations, starting with South Korea in 1990, means that it has obviously hugely significant diplomatic value for Seoul in its attempt to find all possible routes that it can reach out to Pyongyang, since Mongolia's status as a sort of multi-aligned agent makes it easier to talk between Pyongyang and Mongolia, which provides spillover benefits for what South Korea can learn about the way that people in Pyongyang and the leaders in Pyongyang are thinking about the situation in North Korea and North-South relations more generally.
Right. So as far as we know, the two leaders have confirmed their commitment to peace and stability in the Korean peninsula. Then how meaningful is Mongolia's support, Professor Rishi, and what role can it realistically play in helping create conditions for renewed dialogue with Pyongyang?
Yeah, so one of the things that happens every year in Mongolia in June is a large diplomatic gathering, what we call it sort of a track 1.5 gathering. There's a lot of government people there. So officials, but also academics and think tank people and policy experts. This is called the Ulaanbaatar Dialogue. North Korea traditionally has a presence there, and this is used as a back channel for both academics and think tank people, but also government officials to be able to have contact with North Korea. That's still valuable. Obviously, if you think back to 2018, Ulaanbaatar was at one point floated as a potential site for a Trump-Kim meeting. It ended up being Singapore, but I think the fact that Mongolia has this kind of neutrality in a certain sense speaks well for its diplomatic role. The North Koreans, the Mongolians are part of what's called a nuclear weapon-free zone. So they also serve as a kind of a model for denuclearization. And so in that sense, they're a kind of a value agent that South Korea can look to. However, all that being said, the fact of the matter is, North Korea isn't particularly interested in dialogue at the moment. And until North Korea is ready for dialogue with the South or with the U.S., the role that Mongolia can play in any way facilitating or as a back channel for diplomacy is going to be extremely limited.
Right. So finding the ultimate key to renewed dialogue between the two Koreas must be the priority. But beyond today's agreements, Professor Kim, you've mentioned a while ago that the trade relationship has evolved from a passive buyer to a trade partner. What more can be done to maintain this kind of better trading relationship?
The long-term relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, transform the relationship between South Korea and Mongolia in a long-term strategic economic partnership rather than just mere transactional trading entities. Both nations must, move past raw commodity exchanges and build deeply integrated, multi-layered structural systems. That's what I want to emphasize. I presume that achieving the generational shift requires focusing on four critical pillars, including building a resilient and geopolitically insulated logistic corridor. I think this is a very, very important part. Investing in downstream value added and technology transfer. Korea cannot just exploit their materials. We have to transfer technologies to build Mongolian industries, and also co-building climate resilient infrastructure, and finally, deepening institutional this is very important, finance and private sector integrations. One of the, out of the 4 pillars of collaboration, I would like to emphasize 2 things. Mongolia is a landlocked nation, geographically sandwiched between Russia and China, just in Professor last mentioned, which create an inherent transport bottleneck for South Korean businesses, also Mongolian businesses. So upgrading Mongolia's domestic rail networks and connecting them to alternative maritime port via diverse international route to bypassing a geopolitical choke point. And very helpful is to expand air cargo capacities and cold chain logistics to support the high-speed transit of tech component, fresh agricultural produce, and time-sensitive goods. Second part is finance. Long-term partnerships are sustained when capital flows naturally, without constant government intervention. Swiftly ratifying a high-standard SEPA that provide an absolute legal and financial protections for cross-border private equity. Moreover, connecting South Korean digital banking, fintech, and venture capital networks with Mongolian startups to foster a robust ecosystem for small and medium enterprises.
Right. So again, sustained cooperation and execution will be key moving forward. Now, before we conclude our discussion tonight, Professor Rishi, so after attending the NATO summit and holding a state visit to Mongolia, what do you see as the biggest takeaway from President Lee's diplomatic engagements?
Yeah, so I continue to give President Lee a solid B+, maybe even trending towards an A- for his diplomacy over the last year. He's, I think, once he got the trade relationship with the U.S. quasi settled. Of course, with the U.S., it's never settled 100%, but at least under Trump. And once you got APEC out of the way, I think we've seen him continue, of course, to maintain good relations with Japan. He is balancing great power relations, with the U.S. and China, while also turning towards middle powers, and as we're seeing in Mongolia, small states with niche capabilities for Korea, in a way to try to mitigate some of the risks of a very disordered international system right now, and really try to get a little bit of autonomy for South Korea in areas where that's possible. He's focusing, of course, on all the important things that Professor Kim talked about in terms of critical resources. And we see defense exports obviously show up all over the agenda, not so much in Mongolia, but in the recent diplomatic engagements that Lee has had, over the last 6 months, and most recently, of course, at the NATO summit. Obviously, AI is growing, so we're seeing that on the agenda everywhere. I think everyone's trying to figure out how to govern AI, and Lee's, I think, playing his part in trying to do that. And of course, he's doing what every president has to do in every meeting that he or she goes to, which is to put North Korea on the agenda, and to try to find a way to find international partners who can help bridge the gap between the two Koreas and try to lead towards a more sustainable long-term peace and stability on the peninsula.
Right, and we'll certainly be watching to see how these early achievements could shape Korea's diplomacy going forward. But as for now, we'll have to leave it right here. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Rishi.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, Professor Kim, we really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.